What is going on, guys? So I know I promised that War for Paradise was supposed to come out by this summer. It didn't really happen because a lot of things just happen. Life gets in the way sometimes. But I was hoping that it would start by the end of this year. It might, may not, but in the meantime, I'm going to be making some sort of filler content. I'm going to be explaining basically more in depth of the lore of War for Paradise because, I just need something to do while I'm still working on it. And I'm also going to be later explaining every single one of the noble houses, going into that, a little bit about the kingdoms before it finally gets released. The official stuff gets finally released. So let's go ahead and get into it. This project took me a long freaking time. So at the beginning of this story, the world is basically completely united. All of the races of the planet of Romilya, they're still together under the law of the crystal, and basically one of the race known as the Wajati, which are from these areas right around in here, would try to overthrow the crystal's authority and basically would lose their place amongst paradise. And because of this rebellion, the entirety of paradise would be destroyed, bringing in death, yada yada yada. Moving on. And basically I did give a little bit of a brief description. The Wajati are one of the original races. There was 8 in total. And the Wajati basically were pretty much all wiped out except for a few, and they start coming back in some of the last arcs of the series. They become a major threat later on, but they're more or less in the behind the scenes. Yeah. And the measurement of time in Romilya, this is the name of the planet, is AP. So it'd be 10 years after Paradise. So everything is just counting forward. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, so on and so forth. And each one of the races, which I'll be going over a little bit right here, right now, you have the Shido, you have the Turnian, you have the Legionari, the Albatrossi here, which would later split up into kind of like 2 different races, the Albatron and the Albatrossi out here. Albatron, which would later take control of the Antoine River here. The Romavan, which the Romavan were one of the most powerful of all of the races in Paradise, second only to the Wajati. But the Romavans basically decided to pack up and leave the mainland and take a floating island all the way to the west, far away from the main continent. Immediately, wars begin breaking out, and many of the major cities of Paradise were brought to ruins. As we see now, Ajabuji is now in ruins. Kalavin is in ruins. Many of these cities would completely just disappear and would become complete and total ruins in the next 1800 years of history. As we see here, the Romavans have completely just packed up and left their islands and gone. Just gone. And during this time, this is also when the Enroylands were created on the island of Romava, which is where the Romavans went off to on their little island out in the west. And the Romavans are, sorry, not the Romavans, the Enroylands are basically the ones destined to reunite the people, reunite all the races under one king, one ruler, and will basically wipe out the Wajati, the betrayers of the crystal. A lot of wars and stuff like that were basically going on. You have the Eternians in their deserts. You have the Legionaries out in their Great Plains. You have the Albatrossi in their jungles. You have the Shido up in their large pine mountains and stuff like that. Then you have the Morathians out in their meadows, and the Demarians in their icy snow tundras. Right now, one of the most powerful of all the races is still the Legionari, who are extremely barbaric tribes of trying to find the best word right now. I'll come back to it anyways. Sorry, I've got like this weird little cold right now. I know a lot of things are passing right now. As we can see right now, the Shido are basically starting to become united under one kingdom known as the Raide dynasty, which would fall apart pretty fast and would fall apart into several other little kingdoms, as we see now, splitting into the Meijuko and Taozhou dynasty, which is where the 5 clans of Shido would later come on in, which I will go into more depth about the noble families of Romilya later in the future, but not right this second. Many cities were starting to be established, such as like Davidium, Dalvoid, Kai, Tamajiko, Kaldia, Kaladingo, Narasong, which was originally established between both the Turnian, which are actually Turnish, because the Turnish are the people that were originally from Turnia, who started establishing on these islands, and were known for having their silverish hair. Their hair began to turn silver because of the ocean that surrounds this area, the Great Bowl. This is what this area is referred to, especially right around in here. And each one of these kingdoms have their definitely very distinct culture, which I will be making another video about every single one of the kingdoms of Romilya, and then later I'll be getting into the nobilistic family. Stop saying nobilistic family. Just try to keep in mind that the Shido are basically based around more of like an Asian culture. They're very samurai based. The Albatrossi are more or less kind of like a French Creole people. The Turnians are more based off of like Middle Eastern cultures. Their lands are mostly covered in desert, except for a few areas where there are rivers. The Morathians are based off of more or less like a Wild West, 1800 to 1900 Western American culture. And this is when the split of the great Albatrossi and Albatron tribes began. Albatron basically became a kingdom with 3 merchant families that rule over the city of Villatron, which was a bulwark against the legionary hordes that would gather and raid villages and take what they want. And the Shido right now is basically in their golden era of existing. They've taken most of Snake Island. They're making their way into the Samwell Islands now, and they're fighting the Turnish pirates that are constantly raiding their ports and trying to invade their cities, such as the city of Narasong and Inyoba, and take control of the rest of the Samwell Islands, and including Snake Island. And Morathia has been united for quite some time with a pseudo-feudal democracy with its, which I will be going into all the kingdoms soon enough, but for right now we're just kind of going over some sort of brief history, even though this video is going to be quite long. I could go into a long time about everything that goes on. Now, unlike the rest of the kingdoms, like Morathia, Shido, Albatron, Demeria, and Legionaria never really become united. They're sort of just kind of all their own little tribes, even though they're all the same race. The Demerians are kind of have their own little kingdoms and their own little lords, feudal lords that rule over each little city-state, and the Legionaries are very nomadic people, so they're always on the move. They're never really in big locations for very long, except for their 2 holy cities of Kialadango and Chaldea, which are built around the massive ruins of some of the Paradise cities. For quite some time, most of history just kind of stays the same, and it's just tribes fighting against each other. The Albatrossi fighting off Legionarians, the Turnish fighting off Legionari, the Morathians fighting off the Legionaries, the Demerians fighting off the Legionari. The Legionari are probably one of the most powerful of all the people, even though that they're not united under a single leader. And the Shido are probably second because of their extreme, vast control over the East. And probably right now, Albatron would probably be third, lagging a little bit behind. Right now, and this is when Morathia went into their first civil war due to some disagreements over who had the rights to these islands here after they had pushed out the Turnish pirates, which would soon come to an end pretty quick. They would later go into another civil war. The original ranchero and noble families would be kicked off to the islands here, while more or less a communist regime would take over the mainland, but would soon quickly fall apart. Sorry, I'm going silent every once in a while. I'll probably edit. I'm probably going to edit any of the parts where I'm silent out, just to save time. Like I said, for quite a long period of time, there's not really much going on except for just kingdoms fighting against kingdoms, new people taking over. Not much really happens for quite some time until we get to about 1650. That's when everything starts really happening. Because that's when the Enroilans come back from the island of Romava. By the way, I made a mistake here for quite some time, and I never noticed. The city of Turnisso is actually supposed to be on Turn Island, and not on South Island. That was a complete mistake by me. That was a big boo-boo, and I didn't notice that until I started making the next part of it. This is when the Shido started going into their first civil war between the Anashi theocrat. Basically, the religious aspects of the kingdom wanted to take over and combine their theocracy. They wanted to take over the reigning monarchy and replace it with the actual theocrat rather than the monarch being in control, which ultimately failed. But the theocrat of the Shido are still an extremely powerful ruling force over the kingdom, which is a bit different for most other kingdoms. Because, alright, sorry about that, I had to call, so so right here, right now, we're having an extreme rebellion against the actual Morathian government and their noble families, the Ranchero, known as the Free Republic of Morathia, which basically took over the main continent for quite a while, and just soon completely fell apart. And even part of Morathia was taken over by the Turnish, by the Turnians and Turnish. This is known as the Foot of Morathia, which is quite a large mountainous region. Not mountainous, but quite a few hills and large mountains. And for the most part, right now, the world is still kind of in a chaotic place and is just business as usual. And this would continue on again until 1650. That's when it all starts getting very interesting. As we've seen, the Turnish pirates have mostly taken over Snake Island now. They've really taken over quite a bit of the Samwell Islands as well. And they're going to start pushing again. As you can see right here, they're taking over small little port towns on the side of the Shido Empire. And the Shido Empire is more or less in big turmoil right now in this era, and they're about to go through another civil war. Sorry about that, I was having some connection issues. Back to it. So again, what happens in not playing. The theocrats are wanting to overthrow the actual government of Shido. Turnish pirates are now seizing their opportunity to take more of the failing Shido Empire. In the year 1650, the Wajati attacked the floating island, which is the floating island towards the west. The Romavans that went off the main continent. The Wajati knew that the Enroilans would eventually destroy them and recreate paradise, and the Wajati didn't want that. They were going to do whatever that it took to make sure that the Enroilans were wiped off the face of the earth, off of Romilya, which they pretty much did, except for one. which is King Malachi and King Leon's mother, Queen Alia. And using her power, her divine power, she would create the island of the Ring and Angel Island. You'll see here in just a minute. Now, I did have to use a bit of a map change just because there's so many like little Turnish kingdoms, Turnian and Turnish kingdoms. Unlike all the other kingdoms, Turnia is mostly an ununited area. So is Legionaria, so is Demeria, so is Albatron. Only two of the races were actually fully united, which were the Morathian and the Shido. And the Shidos were kind of dying out. And as soon as these islands were created, immediately Turnish pirates started settling on the Ring Island and on Angel Island, which a lot of them would soon begin to follow Queen Alia. Yes. So this is what the world really looks like, not just by race or whatever. This is by kingdom, by tribe, by kingdom, by tribe, by kingdom. Morathia is a kingdom, Shido is a kingdom. These are all little Turnian kingdoms here, all here. These are all legionary tribes that are all, pillaging and doing what they normally do. This is the kingdom of Albatron. These are all of the Albatrossy tribes that are just basically being Albatrossy, not doing really anything. And as we see soon enough, there's a big time skip. In the year 1675, that's when King Malachi and King Leon took control of the Royal Empire, and soon quickly seized control over Angel Island and the Ring. They soon invaded South Island, and they would put Dal Alfie Fenry, who is Ivo Fenry's great-grandfather, in charge of the island. That's how the Fenry family were created. And Ivo Fenry would become later the main antagonist of the series. They would also take control of the North Island, the Scabbard, Free Island. They would soon take control of the Samwell, and they would invade the dying Shido Empire and quickly take the city of Narasong and split their forces and cross Shido and basically take control of an empire that stood for more than 1,000 years in less than 2. And they quickly started basically ramping their way through Turnia and making every single one of the kingdoms become a subject or a vassal of the Royal Empire. They quickly started taking over Snake Island. The reason why it's called Snake Island is because it's a long, skinny little island like a snake. And they soon started invading Morathia as well, with the Morathian Islands. Their mission and goal was to unite the world under one leadership. As you can see here, they've invaded Albatron, and they've taken control, and they've managed to take make two of the family's subjects, which is the Adara and the Cimmerian. And the Orlais were the only family of the three that did not bend the knee to them, and they were wiped out by the Enroilan, which what was left of the Orlais basically married into the Cimmerian and the Adara, or fled into the jungles of the Albatrossy tribes, which would later make the kingdom of Orlais. No? The kingdom of, yeah, I can't remember. Yeah. During this time, quite a huge thing was starting to happen. One of the great Khans, the great leaders of the legionary tribes, was decimating all of the other tribes and uniting them under one leader. Because unlike all of the other kingdoms, their leaders are all based off of strength. And whenever their leader dies, the people of Legionaria will go out and find new leaders to follow. And soon they started raiding into the Turnish parts, the Turnian and Albatron parts of the Royal Empire now, and they had to fend them off. The Royals had to fend them off with quite a small military force. They managed to do it. However, under the forces of Nahut Khan, for the very first time in its 1,300 years of history at this point, actually about 1,200, the city of Villatron was actually sacked, and quite a large portion of it was burned by Nahut Khan. A lot of it was destroyed. However, he would later die in combat, and his kingdom would split into three by his three sons. And during this time, a Turnian confederation was founded to fight off against the Royal Empire, trying to make their succeed, but that didn't really go that well for them. And it happened again. They thought they could do it once, they could try and do it again, but it failed. And soon the Cimmerian and the Adara family started subjecting all the Albatrossi tribes out in the east. And soon the Roylands began making landfall in the kingdom of Morathia, and would take their capital, the city of Madrid. And seizing this opportunity, the legionary tribes would begin marching their way through Morathia. So would the Demarians, which would basically cause the Morathian rancheros and Hugo Francesco to just finally allow subjugation of the kingdom under the Royal Empire. Because they would rather be subjects and still retain their government and their way and culture under the Royal Empire than to be absolutely destroyed by the Demarians and Legionaries. During this time, again, another Turnian confederation would be born, just to try and succeed from the Roylands once again. It sort of worked. They held their own for a decent amount of time. They even started invading their way into Shido and Morathia. However, once again, seizing the opportunity, the Legionari started making their way through mainland Turnia, and they decided it was better to be a subject of the Royal Empire than to be destroyed by the Legionaries. And for a little while, there was sort of like this sort of calming era due to the fact that the Royal Empire had just expanded so much and just wasn't able to fully govern over everything that they had conquered. They had to establish some sort of government to take control. I'm still recording, right? Yeah. But they still had sights on trying to invade the last major area, which was the kingdoms of Demeria, which were some of the richest kingdoms at this point in history. And at this point, the last bits of the Albatrossy tribes were uniting into a confederation to try and fight off the Enroyland Empire, even trying to take the city of Villatron, which didn't exactly work, but they managed to do some damage in the year 1692. Now, the Enroyland Empire basically had three major kingdoms to fight off: the Alarai Kingdom, the Legionary Hordes, and the Demarian kingdoms. And they started making their way through their lands by their rivers, by the Mespi Diorg River right here, the one that splits right between Morathia and Albatron. Morathia and Demeria. And again, once again, the Legionaries, seeing this opportunity, attempted to basically invade all parts of the Enroyland Empire, and it worked quite well. And hearing about this, the Alarai Kingdom even tried to seize back some of their lands. Because of these invasions from the legionary tribes, there, towards the south of Demeria, there'd be quite a big mixture between the two cultures. This would later become kind of like a Durlagian people, which it happens so often. Right now, this would be under the leadership of, I think, Kaku Khan, which is supposed to be Nahut's grandson or great-grandson. I'd have to pull out the, I don't really feel like doing it right now, but I'd have to pull out the family tree, which I don't really feel like doing right now. They made a little subject state of the Southern Demarians, which is what the Enroylands were doing as well. And for a due time, there was peace, except for out in the east, where they were trying to deal with the Alarai Kingdom, which wasn't going the best due to just fighting in the extreme dense jungles. And out in the west, fighting off both the Legionaries and fighting off the Demarians was just a painstake for them. However, bit by bit, they were starting to make their way through, even taking control, finally, of the Demarian Triangle. However, they had still lost severely in the south of Demeria. And at this point, the Alarai Kingdom had split into two against the Ai Kingdom. They broke into a civil war, and they nearly wiped each other out. And because of this, they never really were at the same height ever again. At this point, the Enroylands were made a deal with the Jorvik family, which are basically in control of the Mespi Diorg River and the great arm of Demeria and the city of Yordine, and this little island right here. And they had subjugated them. They had also taken control of the city of Yorkona, and they were trying to make their way through Demeria once again. However, it would take them another almost 12 years to do, as the Legionaries once again started pillaging their way through Turnia and Albatron, and western Albatron. Soon it became a realization just how much of a threat the Legionaries were. They had also managed to move in and take the city of Dalvoid, and were heading towards the last major stronghold of Demeria, which is the city of Davidium, which did not go that well because during this time a great white storm had hit the continent, which is a massive storm which comes up from the north and brings in a massive snowfall which basically wipes out everything. And this was one of the biggest, largest ones that has ever happened. These storms happen between every 25 to 100 years. And depending on how many years it's been, the bigger they are. And this one hadn't happened in almost 100, so it was massive. This was known as the Great White of 1700. I know if some of y'all are watching, you probably like, what the hell is this guy talking about? I promise you it'll start making more sense once the series finally comes out. As you can see, most of the Enroilan forces were basically completely wiped out during this time. They tried to keep on pushing and pushing and pushing, but the Enroilan Empire was just so exhausted at this point that they just had to come up with a quick treaty. It didn't last very long, to say the least. They even lost the city of Yorkona once again. And now they were basically trapped into basically three parts of Demeria. Up here by Fort Defiance, the cities of Davidium and Dalvoid, and what was left of the Jorvik family up in the arm of Demeria, as most of the Demerian forces were just too strong to fight off. However, bit by bit, and kept on pushing and pushing and pushing, they managed to take all four of the major cities of Demeria. And in a last-ditch effort, the last of the Demerian kingdoms united into a confederation to try and fight off the Enroilans. Now, during this time, the Morathians had also succeeded because in their treaty with the Demerian forces, they had signed away some of the land, some of the territory that belonged to the Morathian people, including important families such as the Taranka and Architeres, and even the Archeros, which was not going to settle well with the Morathian people. And when they were told they couldn't invade and retake these lands from the Demerian forces, they succeeded. So the Enroilans were now having to fight off the Demerian Confederation, a rebellion Morathian state, what was left of the Demerian forces, legionary tribes, and the Alarai Kingdom, all at the same time, while still managing to making sure every other family was staying loyal. However, in due time, the Morathians finally resubjugated themselves under the Enroilan Empire, only paying a small compensation, and were asked to invade Legionaria as well, which went okay. It didn't go the best. And the Demerian forces of the Confederation were holding their own once again, and another major descendant of Nahut Khan was preparing to invade the city of Villatron once again. However, it failed. In many areas of Demaria, and the Demarian people were rebelling against the Royal Empire and were refusing subjugation. And however, the Confederation was slowly falling apart. But in 1709, they were able to recapture the city of Davidium. So, to try to appease the Demarian people, the Royal Empire finally allowed some of the noble, the tribal families to govern themselves as long as they pay tribute. And however, it didn't always work, because a lot of times they kept on just rebelling and doing what they normally do. And for another 2 years from this point, the Demarians would continue to rebel. And the once again, another descendant of Nahut Khan, forget this one's name, was actually doing quite well and managed to destroy quite a bit of the countryside of Villatron and Albatron, and even managed to go up all the way up the Antoinette and attack parts of Shidokai. So now, finally, Demaria had been more or less fully subjugated, with military districts occupying certain areas. And all that was really left of the resistance to the Enroilan rule was, of course, the legionary tribes and the Alarai Kingdom, which the Alarai Kingdom wouldn't last for that much longer. However, the Enroilans were having a massive difficulty trying to take over the Legionaries due to the fact that they were nomadic tribes and they didn't stay in one place for very long. And they were constantly known to raid and sack little villages out west. So eventually a plan would come to split the continent in half and create a great canal, so that way they could invade around from coast to coast. Because used to, what they would have to do, any of their forces, they would have to rely completely on these rivers here to move any forces down, and just rely on a few regiments that were maybe posted out here. There was nothing they could really do to fight off a massive legionary horde until this canal came. Which would start to be under construction around this time, and wouldn't be officially completed till 1725. And then again, another one of the descendants of Nahut Khan would try to take the city of Villatron to try and slow down the Enroilan escapades and try and stop the construction of the Great Canal. However, it didn't go very well, as the Enroilans had managed to sail all the way around and invade the south of Legionaria, creating a small little subject state, as the canal was almost completely underway and fully done with construction, which would literally split the continent in half from east to west. And for a due time, again, there was eras of peace and then war and then peace and then war. However, the legionary tribes were constantly uniting under new leaderships due to the fact of the realization of just how powerful and how much they had lost since the Enroilan Empire began. The legionaries were at this point had lost basically all the way. They used to be all the way up from here to here, down to here. So they had lost quite a bit. So a leader tried to take control, of all these tribes, declaring himself the new great king of Legionaria. However, fearing what this man could possibly quite do, King Leon and King Malachi sent out an assassin to go out and kill him, which worked quite well. Because if he had united the Legionary tribes at that point, there's no telling what sort of havoc he could have reaped. Because at this point, the Great Canal had not even been built, so there was no real defense for anything out east or west. This great river right here was basically the blocking point for anything, any sort of raids or anything. Out here in the south, it could definitely happen, and around in here. But this area right here was sort of seen as the Legionaries' gateway into everything out east and west and north. So by building this great canal, it basically blocked off everything for the Legionaries. And in 240-1725 it was officially completed, splitting the continent in half with a great bridge over the northern part and the southern part, now allowing commerce to go through this area as well, which would later, where the city of Alfino would be built. So someone from Shidokai could finally go all the way to Demaria. Someone from it made travel so much easier, not having to go around the entirety of a continent, but just straight through. And for the next 100 years, it would all be spent on fighting the Legionaries. For the next 100 years. All of the other kingdoms fell within 10. No, that's not right. All of the other kingdoms combined fell within 80 years. All of them combined. Legionaria, it took over 100. And the Alarai kingdom fell apart when the Bull Real took over, and the Legionaries just decided, yeah, we're not going to let this happen. We're taking you over. And the lands were finally given over to the Cimmerian family. And for time and time again, the Legionaries were just fighting off the Royal Empire as much as they possibly could. They would even lose their holy city of Kialadango, the great gate into the west. And this is how it would go for the next 100 years, just picking off the Legionaries bit by bit, treaty by treaty. And yeah, slowly but surely, it just happened over the next 100 years. More and more military districts were set up to keep an eye on the Legionaries out west. I guess you could say the southwest. And there were times when the Legionaries were definitely holding their own in fighting off the Enroilans. Even in 1761, retaking the city of Kialadango, which was a major loss for the Enroilan. But finally, in 1783, under the leadership of Kamul Khan, which is a descendant of Nahud Khan, I'm not quite sure exactly, but he was able to unite most of the legionary tribes to try and fight off the Royal Empire once and for all. And this war would go on for almost 40 years. However, in 1790, the legionary tribes basically betrayed Kamul and turned against him and wanted their own leaders. However, the Royal Empire knew that they were going to have to try and finish them off eventually. And the time finally came. Slowly but surely. Also, by this point, around 1801, 1802, King Malachi and King Leon had gone their separate ways, as King Malachi had taken up residence in the city of Adria Samosa due to the fact that they were just completely disagreeing, and King Malachi decided that he never wanted to kill again. And in the year of 1805, the Holy Temple of Chaldea was taken. And for the next 10 years or so, the last remnants of Kamul Khan's tribes were slowly decimated and destroyed. And finally, in 1823, Kamul Khan surrendered, and the last of the legionaries were completely subjugated or killed, most of which were killed. And for a short time, the continent of Romilya was finally united under one leader. However, it didn't last very long, as Ivo Finri, the highest ranking general of both King Leon and Malachi, would betray the Royal family and take the city of Angel Island, which would start the 16-year-long civil war, which is where the story sort of begins. Gives you a little bit of a brief story there, a little bit of lore. And many of the royal noble families had also sided with Ivo, such as a few families in Turnia, the Samwells, the family of North Island, the Ring, which were actually directly controlled under the Royal Empire, which the coup d'etat happened on the 20th day of 1824. King Malcolm, which was King Leon's son, was finally killed. Was killed during his coronation. That's when the coup happened. King Leon had been dead for a little while, and King Malachi was in Adria Samosa when everything was going down. And many other of the families started joining Ivo in his escapades against the Royal Empire. And with his technologies that he had been using in the Legionary Wars and to help modernize the empire, it was a very rapid defeat very quickly. As many of the former states and stuff like that were been taken over, and puppets have been emplaced by Ivo Fenry himself, such as the Los Terra family, which were originally from right here, which were put in charge of the Kingdom of Madrid. And at this point, Prince Cassius, who was basically leading the rebellion against Ivo, had declared all of Legionaria abandoned. So the Legionaries were able to do whatever they pleased with that area once again. And this is where the story technically begins, on 207-1837, when Cassius and Royland, which is the grandson of King Leon, invaded Angel Island to try and kill Ivo Fenry. However, it didn't go all as planned. Now this is where I'm going to actually be ending the video. I was only going to be doing sort of a brief sort of lore history behind everything that had happened up to this point. Everything else you'll have to find out afterwards when the series officially comes out.